Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this important discussion on endpoint control and compliance. My name is Shaquib Izhar, a threat intel researcher at Kratikal, and I'll be your host for this session. We are thrilled to have a panel of esteemed experts with us today. We have Mr. Nikunj Rakesh, Team Lead for Risk and Compliance, and Ms. Sanjana Kumari, Security Compliance Executive at Kratikal, who will showcase real-world example of how effective compliance and prevent cyber attacks. How this compliance can prevent ongoing cyber attacks or future cyber attacks. On the next hour, we will explore how endpoint control and compliance work hand in hand to safeguard your organization from cyber threats. We'll discuss the importance of regulation, how to secure your device effectively, and most importantly, how to prevent future attacks. Before starting, I would like to ask guys, can you hear me properly? Am I audible properly? Okay. So moving on to our first question without wasting any time. So let's start. The first question I would like to start with Nikunj. So Nikunj, can you tell us what are the different type of compliance framework that our organization need to be aware of?
Hi, Shakib. First of all, thanks a lot for having me here for this webinar. So, to answer your question, basically, first of all, I would like to clear certain things in terms of compliance. So, there are basically three types of, one is standard, one is framework, and one is regulation. So, if you talk about standards, standard is something that is specific set of requirements that must be met. For example, if you talk about an example of a standard is ISO 27001, ISO 22301. If you talk about a compliance framework is something that is structured approach to, achieve compliance with various standards and regulations. So basically, it is a approach which some organizations should follow in order to be compliant with certain standards and regulations. Coming to regulations part, regulations are laws or let's say acts or rules that govern certain bodies. So regulatory compliances generally are the utmost important what the organizations need to focus on while being compliant with certain frameworks or standards. So this is the major difference about the different types of compliances available in the industries and in the market right now. And to differentiate between them, as I mentioned, standard is one, framework is one, and regulation is one.
Okay. So this raises a question like how organization identify the compliance and regulation that applies to them.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, Shakib, again, to answer your question. So, if you talk about organizations, that should be so. Basically, what happens is organizations, if let's say they have a regulatory body that is regulating them for their business operations. Let's say if you talk about, so I would name certain regulatory bodies in India. For example, RBI, for example, SEBI. These are regulatory bodies that regulate their regulated entities. So when you talk about, as I mentioned in the previous question that you asked, regulations are the utmost important things that the organizations need to comply with in order to continue with their business operations. So, obviously, if let's say certain organizations are regulated by certain regulatory bodies, then to comply with the regulations is the first priority for them. And obviously, there are organizations who, in case, let's say, they are not regulated by a regulatory body. In that case, what organizations can follow is to achieve the best practice, they can follow certain frameworks. Let's say, if you talk about frameworks, so they can follow, for example, NIST cybersecurity framework, they can implement in their organization. Though they won't get a certification for that, but if they want to go for a certification kind of a thing, they want to keep an artifact for their uh, organization. So obviously, achieving certifications for the organization are big assets, right, in terms of achievement and everything. So if the organization wants to keep an artifact, which basically is their secure nature, how they secure the customer data and how they deal with everything what they do on a daily basis. So in that sense, going on for a standard like ISO 27001. So ISO 27001 talks about information security management systems. It is, you can say, the baseline of all the information security compliances. And then talking about, let's say, ISO 27701. 27701 is something that talks about PIMS. PIMS is Privacy Information Management Systems. Then another critical one is ISO 22301. That talks about BCMS, that is Business Continuity Management System. So there are different types of standards, different types of frameworks available in the market, which obviously organizations can go on and see which certification or which standard fits their business process at the best.
Okay, so let me summarize this. Like, if an organization providing medical devices related services, so then it's HIPAA. Is it correct? But ISO 27001 is like this is some basic standard which every organization should follow.
Right. Right. So it's a baseline. Basically, Shakib, it is something that if you want to achieve certain, milestones in terms of information security, so 27001, starting with a standard like 27001, is a baseline, and every organization should go on for that. So there is no hard and fast rule that this organization cannot go for 27001. All types of organizations can go on for 27001, and because obviously in today's world we are storing and processing all the data digitally in our, let's say, if the organization is a cloud native organization, or even if they have their on-prem servers, in that case also, so ISO deals with all types of organization, and obviously it is so flexible that we can customize the implementations as per the business nature of the organization. So this is a plus point of implementing ISO.
Okay, thank you, Nikunj, for a valuable answer. Okay, now Sanjana, like we have seen so many data breaches happen in the past, and when I checked them, I think some breaches, could have been prevented if proper compliance were in place. So, what are the challenges these companies face while maintaining compliance?
So, first of all, I would like to thank you, Shakir, for welcoming me over this webinar. To answer your question, well, I would say the major challenges that companies or maybe the organizations whom we often have as our clients for compliance consultancy, they have with respect to the endpoint security compliance is being up to date or being frequent with deploying updates and patches when it comes to the hardening of the endpoint systems. For example, an organization uh, has their endpoints managed and centralized over Microsoft's Azure Active Directory, so they can use that Active Directory to push those updates to the endpoints or the host systems of the employees who are having it. However, the major concern which follows this I would say subject is when the organization is working. First of all, let's consider the scenario when the organization is working fully in house, then I would say deploying updates and patches through a centralized medium, that is your Azure's Active Directory, comes quite handy because the deployer and the endpoint system owner is in endpoint system custodian, more likely is under the same roof. So when they are sitting under the same roof, then coordinating with each other comes quite handy just in case update fails, so a rectification can be done immediately. However, if the organization is operating from a hybrid model, let's say, or a remote model, then that thing is not handy, first of all, because that person is not accessible to you. Secondly, for an update or a patch to be quite effective, the device has to be active. So until and unless a device is not active or is not far from disruption, an update or a patch cannot take place. This is the major concern which often comes across when it comes to deploying updates or patches. Another major concern is manually auditing the audit trails which are generated over the endpoint detection solutions which are deployed over the endpoint systems of the users. So even if there is an automated monitoring and logging solution, however, that solution is not 110% effective. It does require time to time periodic, I would say, monitoring by a person who is quite equipped with the concepts of how to do so. So a person should map the audit trails. They should look into the false positives if they are being generated, and if so, they should then adjust the sensitivity of that EDR solution, or maybe that EDS solution, or the XDR MDM solution, whatever they are using in their organization.
Okay, so like you said, hardening endpoint is also like challenges the organization is facing. For those who don't know, hardening means like if I have a laptop, so I have to fix all the issues which can lead to cyber attacks. Hardening means reducing the attack surface. For a Windows laptop, make sure you are disabling NTLM hashes. You are disabling. You are enabling like fingerprint authentications, multi-level authentications. You are actually providing only guest level access to all the employee, not providing any admin level access to any employee. So this could be hardening for endpoints. Okay.
Definitely, Shakib.
Okay. Okay. So like if when we talk about endpoint, so we this actually led us to a next section, which is endpoint security. Like most people are not aware of common threats in endpoint security. So Sanjana, could you explain what the most common endpoint threats are?
Definitely. So, continuing my previous response, where endpoint hardening is a major concern and it does leads to many threats. So, let's start with the endpoint hardening itself. When we talk about endpoint hardening, what we are talking about configuring those device as per the business needs. So, for example, port blocking is a very common thing that has to be done over the devices. Uh, the user should not be having the admin rights over their system. They should be having rather a user right. The admin right should be with the IT team. So those configuration related issues should be resolved. So for that, the person who is in charge of doing all these activities in the organization, they should set the right policies, basically the right guidelines to do so. Then they should, I would say, adjust the sensitivity level or the policies, the technical policies over the solutions, and then configure the solution again and again if the bugs are encountered. For example, there is a base guideline, but if a bug is encountered and that bug requires the business to adjust its configuration to from this limit to this limit, then that thing has to be taken care of. Another, I would say, common endpoint threat that can happen is because of social engineering attacks. So when we talk about social engineering attacks, one very prevalent issue that can happen is when the employees are allowed to work from a BYOD, which is bring your own device model or choose your own device model. So when somebody is bringing their own personal asset to cater to the business needs of the organization, that person would be using their, I would say, communication channel, be it their mail or the WhatsApp. By any chance, if that person gets phished over the same asset which they are using for their business as well, that malicious file can easily transfer from their communication personal communication channel to the organization's communication channel. This increases the threat surface by many folds. Another point of concern, which I would like to highlight over here, would be the 0-day attack, which often gets neglected. But again, I do believe that since if a patch is not out yet, it becomes very hard for the organization to do anything about it, because
Definitely.
till the time the patch is not out, the vulnerability still exists. So these are like top three common endpoint threats that can happen to any organization in general.
Like as Sanjana said, there are some 0 days attacks, malicious websites. These are some example of common threats the endpoints faces. I have an example. I also have example to share with you guys. Let me share my screen. So if you guys remember about the 3CX hack, okay. So as we have seen about 3CX, what happened here, if I summarize, uh, there was a malicious attack on a website. It's a trading software website. What was the problem there? The website was vulnerable. So what a threat actor did, they infected the tool which was Xtrader. You can Google the name after the seminar. Xtrader software. The threat actor infected the tool, and one of the employee from 3CX downloaded that infected tool to his machine. What happened next? When the person, the employee from 3CX ran the tool, I will not go in very deep here. I will just summarize what happened. When he started the program, the malicious third software, it started infecting his device, and from there, that malicious software started spreading and infected all other employees, all other 3CX employees' device. What happened there? Not only those devices, actually there was a services which was running in the background. It's a hijacked DLL, malicious DLL. So in the last, let me summarize what happened when every other devices started infecting. The malware started pivoting to other employees. Like the malware was inside other employees' computer, and it also infected the 3CX installer, which other company used for phone calls. And so what happened from there? The 3CX, when 3CX installer was infected, whoever had downloaded that tool from 3CX website, they were also infected. This led to a big supply chain attack, and this was really a good example to make sure you have a hardened endpoint, you have a proper control on endpoint device, you have not provided a proper admin access to every employee, and make sure like uh, you are taking control. There is a DLP in the network. Okay, thank you, Sanjana, for your answer. Moving on to our next question. So, Nikunj, there are different type of endpoint security solution compliance. So, could you shed some light on this? Yeah, like what are the different endpoint security solutions for compliances?
Shakib, to start with, so basically there are different types of solutions that we can use in terms of endpoint security. Because these tools or these solutions go domain by domain, they cover different domains. Because endpoint security is not just one domain. We have to cover, let's say, talk about anti-malware solutions, data leakage prevention, host-based IPS, host-based IDS, EDR. So all these solutions have different functionalities. And let's say you have implemented a antivirus, antivirus, so, centrally managed antivirus in your endpoint devices. In that case, you cannot say that you're safe from all the other threats, or let's say, so there is another threat of data exfiltration. So that is taken care by a tool like DLP, or a data leakage prevention tool. So specifically talking about the types of solutions, there are a large number of solutions. As I mentioned, anti-malware solutions, signature-based anti-malware solutions that basically focus on if there is something malicious that have entered the systems or the endpoint. So it is basically a signature-based anti-malware solution that scans the system for any malicious signatures, and then keeps it out of the system and until we take a step on it. The other one we can talk about is host-based IDS and IPS. Similar to network-based IDS and IPS, host-based IDS IPS works as IDS is something that works passively. It doesn't prevent something from happening, but obviously it logs and it notifies the admin that something malicious is happening in the endpoint, this particular thing or so. Similarly, talking about HIPS, host-based IPS is something that basically prevents the current particular thing, current scenario happening. Let's say if you have, found out there is a threat that has been flagged on any kind of activity on the system. So IPS, if you're using a host-based IPS, that will block that from executing inside the systems. Coming to EDR, endpoint detection response tools. EDR tools are majorly used. So let's say so basically there is another tool by the name of SIEM, that is Security Incident Event Management Tool. So SIEM is something that logs all the events, right? So events in terms of, let's say, even if you click or you log in into the system or you make any changes in the system, all of these are the events for computers. So SIEM is responsible to log each and every event, and there are SOC teams that are sitting to analyze all these events. And let's say if you have set down certain policies in the SIEM also, that figures out and filters out. Let's say there are certain malicious, signatures that are matching with the policies, that this kind of event should be triggered as an incident. So SIEM helps us in triggering the logging the events, and analyzing if they are incidents or not. And coming to EDR, so EDR is something that obviously actively logs everything, and as the name says, endpoint detection response, it detects as well as has some functionalities that the users or the admins can use to respond upon the particular threat, or any event that has, or any incident that has occurred. So basically, the isolation of that particular file, or let's say whatever it is that is infected in the system, so you can basically respond to those particular things. Coming to the encryption part, encryption is very important, because what all data is residing on your systems. Even the, let's say, there are some cases. So uh, in my experience working with a lot of organizations, so these days majority of organizations are working on cloud. They're cloud native organizations. So whenever we obviously, in my consultation part, what we do is we obviously suggest certain things to get implemented in order to achieve best practice standards of information security. So some of the organizations, we get a response that we are cloud native, we don't need device level encryption. But I would clear this particular point over here, is because let's say even if you're cloud native, you are storing everything on cloud, your web applications, your servers are on cloud, that is fine. But to access those clouds, you're using those endpoints. And let's say even if you are downloading anything that may contain, let's say, any confidential data. So data in terms of, let's say, if you are downloading PII, if you are processing PII, any sensitive information, so PII is also considered very sensitive information. And if you are dealing with PII or any financial records or any confidential documents of the any customers or your organization, obviously encryption plays a very vital role over there. Because let's say in case your a laptop or any endpoint of an employee gets stolen one day, and if it is not encrypted, the data is clearly visible to whosoever stole the laptop. So it is always better to have encryption in place, that is encryption at rest for the devices. Coming to the last, but obviously not the least, patch management. Patch management is very important domain, as Sanjana also mentioned in the previous question, that patch management is something that we need to enforce throughout the organization. So under governance, risk, and compliance, setting up policies or setting up procedures is one thing, and enforcing them is another thing. So it is utmost important to enforce controls like patch management, because let's say there are Google Chrome installed in all the systems of employees. So let's say Google has released that this particular build or this particular version has certain vulnerabilities associated to it. Being an admin, if you are, because of your policies and procedures, being an admin, you will inform your employees that you have to update this to the latest version of the Google Chrome, right? In this case, what happens is, let's say you have told this to employees and an admin, but it is not necessary that the employee would act upon it, right? So in order to make sure that happens, enforcement is very important over here, and the admin should have control over endpoint devices that are obviously allotted by the organization itself. Admin should be able to control the patches and update the patches from the central console itself. So this helps a lot in managing endpoints.
Okay. You mentioned about DLP, C, host-based intrusion detection system, and intrusion prevention system. Okay. So, could you tell me, for a general audience who are not aware of these things, could you tell me the difference between intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system, and what SIEM? Okay, and when do we use these things?
Okay. As I mentioned, Shakib, so IDS and IPS, similarly to the network-based IDS IPS that we have generally these days in firewalls, right? So IDS is generally placed Possibly it is not placed in line of the network. It is something that just triggers something malicious happening. Let's say if something malicious is happening in your network, or you're talking about the host-based IDS and IPS, because they would be taking care of the endpoints that they are installed on, because they are agent-based tools. So some agents get installed on the systems. So in this case, IDS would generally notify or just give a notification to the admin that this particular thing is malicious, and it should be removed or something, right? IPS is something that obviously would notify the admin, as well as with that it would prevent it from executing. So under IDS, it may get executed and then triggered to the admin, but under IPS, it won't be able to execute because it is placed in line of the network and it is preventing something from executing, as the name says, IDS and IPS. Coming to SIEM, again, as I mentioned, if you, let's say, integrate SIEM with EDR or XDR, then you are able to respond. So SIEM is a very, very useful tool that you can use in your organization. SIEM, you can integrate it with all the components or all the surfaces that you have in your organization. So once you integrate SIEM with all those components, what it does is basically, it, as I mentioned earlier, it creates a lot of events, right? So obviously there are, if we are setting down policies in the SIEM, there may be some false positives, but obviously the SOC analysts would be there to resolve those false positives or set the policies according to the organization. So SIEM generally would log all the events, what is happening in the system, and then categorize events from incidents. And when you have figured out that there are incidents happening, let's say you have figured out this was one of the incidents that happened, and it is a very critical incident, or even if it is not a very critical incident, with the help of a SIEM, you won't be able to respond to that particular event or incident. It is just used for logging and monitoring purposes. But if you integrate it with a tool like XDR or EDR, Extended Detection Response, Endpoint Detection Response, then you may be able to respond on that or contain that particular threat.
Okay, so in general, IDS will detect and generate alert if there is any threat in the network. IPS will not only generate alert, it will also prevent that specific threat, malicious file, or IP address or website. Okay, thanks for your uh, telling us about these things. Okay, moving on. Like, Nikunj, could you tell, could you shed some light on the unified platform for endpoint security compliance?
Okay. Shakib, there are certain things that we just discussed around the different types of solutions available for endpoint control security, right? So, unified platform in itself, as the name says, is something that is unified and is consolidated. So, unified platform for endpoints is generally a consolidated platform where it covers all the functionalities of all the tools that are available that we just discussed earlier. So, obviously, there are some other tools also that we missed out because obviously there are tools like mobile device management tools, MDM. There are tools like DLPs that we mentioned. So, majorly, if you talk about a unified platform for endpoint security compliance, it is something that is consolidated solution for all types of domains, be it patch management, be it encryption, be it anything that you talk about. So generally, a unified platform is something that has all these functionalities, and you need not to have the headache of integrating all the tools together. So it is something that does that gives you it streamlines your operations and your everything with the particular SOC that you are implementing or setting up in the organization. So it is a good to have thing because it makes everything on a same page, and in terms of reporting also, because CISOs have to go through the reports that basically generates details about incidents, events, and a lot of other things that we just discussed. So if you have a unified platform for everything, then it is obviously a better thing to have everything at a single place. So details about all the threats that are detected, details about all the patches that are updated, details about encryption that are being implemented. So if everything is at a single place, obviously it makes sense, and it increases usability and easiness of using a particular tool.
Okay, so like we are talking about endpoint security, IDs, and IPS, we have a case study from previous podcast which I would like to share here. We talked about this in our podcast also. Like Okta got breached because one of the employee used a Gmail account in the office premises. And because we are talking about like endpoint security and compliance, I would like to show a graph on this. What happened there? Uh, One of the employee was using his personal account on Okta system, and when he used his personal Google account, the har file, which is available in Okta, was synced in his Chrome profile. And what happened? It is considered as that his personal computer was also infected. Just give me a second, let me share. So I hope it's visible to all you guys. As we can see, har file, uh, it's like session token, which was uploaded to a Okta system. So when the employee logged into his personal account from Office through Google Chrome, there's a feature in Chrome like it will sync the settings and other profile to his profile. So what happened here? The employee logged into his personal account and the access key was synced here with Chrome profile settings. And as I said, it is assumed like his personal device was also compromised. When the attacker got access to those hover files, he replicated employee identity. He used his identity to access all the Okta talent system from them. Okay, from here to here, he was able to access anything, any profile, any systems, as we can see here. Okay, so in this case, what I would like to say here, Nikunj, is it correct that could you point out any a central point of failure? Could you tell us about any like how this attack could have been prevented?
So, Shakib, as you rightly said in this case study of the data breach that happened, so as we were discussing about several endpoint security solutions available in the market right now, so generally people, as I mentioned earlier also, generally organizations who are cloud native and are just working on the cloud are not that much concerned about the endpoint security and the controls that are being implemented on endpoint level, right? But they are very important as this breach also gives us a lesson. So the lessons we have learned from this breach are they could be basically enforcing organizational level policies on the endpoint devices. If you are not enforcing the organizational level policies on the endpoints, obviously the endpoints would not be in a synchronized place. And let's say if, as I mentioned, the example of Google Chrome in the earlier question, in that sense, how it justifies particular thing that we need to implement things like patch management, encryption on the endpoints. Because let's say even if a software available on your system is not updated and there are certain patches available, security patches available, and the people or the employees working on the endpoints are not updating them regularly, in that
Hmm.
case, obviously, unknowingly, some vulnerability can get exploited, and when an attacker enters, a threat actor enters into the endpoint of a user, obviously that actor is getting into the network of the devices of the organization. So once there is, the resources are available to that attacker, then the lateral movement of that attacker is made very easy and very simple. So even if let's say you are opening, so again, opening personal email accounts and opening public repositories also should not be allowed in corporate devices, because first of all, there is no reason of opening personal accounts in terms of if you are using your corporate devices. And obviously, if you are doing something like that in your personal accounts, there are a lot of spam that you are receiving on a daily basis. There are a lot of things, a lot of phishing emails, a lot of smishing emails. It can be anything, right? So as a layman, you won't be able to figure out what is legit and what is not right, right? So in that sense, even if you are not aware about that, even if you are aware about that, so basically information security always talks about preventive, detective, reactive controls. So even if we have implemented preventive controls, as in we are awareing people, making people aware about the information security best practices, and we are asking them to check the domains before clicking into any link for a phishing email, let's say. Even after that also, the risk, so residual risk will never be zero in any case. So in that case also, things can be there that can be exploited, that are not even being known by the user who is using the endpoint. So in this case, it is very important to maintain or manage all the devices, and it is even more important to do that in case of BYOD or bring your own device, because obviously that is a personal system that people are working on, and they are dealing with corporate information, they are dealing with information of their customers, their organization, their partners. In that case, obviously, in order to enforce and make sure the data retention policy, the data classification scheme that we have set, it is being followed, we need to have certain controls in the user level endpoints also, even if they are personal devices. So whenever personal devices are being used, organizations often apply the BYOD policy, that is bring your own device policy. And obviously, this comes with certain compensatory controls like mobile device management tools, which governs. So basically, these tools will. So this is a very big misconception around people or the employees. Let's say, being in the information security team, if you are going to enforce this particular thing, if you are going to get MDM solutions installed in, let's say, or DLP solution, even if you talk about the DLP solutions, people get very scared about it, that you'll be going to collect our logs. So you'll be collecting our logs and you'll be analyzing them. So whatever we do, it will be exposed in front of you. But the thing is, solution like MDM, a particular MDM solution would always segregate the corporate and the personal space, and the files that are from the source of your corporate site, they would be residing in the corporate container, and the personal container that you have, those files won't be transferred to the corporate container. So these such tools create kind of segregations between the environments, and hence employees are allowed to work on the corporate environments with the corporate data that they are dealing with.
Okay. So to summarize, attacks like this could have been prevented if there was proper restrictions policy, like you are not allowed to do this, you are not allowed to access any personal account on office premises. Like whitelisting policy could have been used here. Could can prevent also. Okay, great. Okay, so Sanjana, as like organization provides remote work for their employees. In that case, how can they ensure that the remote employees are following endpoint security policies?
Definitely, Shakib. So, as per my previous response, there are basically two models currently where the organizations are either working from an in-house model where no employee is supposed to work remotely. So, enforcing patches and pushing or deploying updates gets quite handy. Resolving any issues becomes very easier because everybody is working under the same roof. However, with remote working, though it does bring some, I would say, feasibility to the business model, but there are some challenges when it comes to security, because authenticating the users and I would say sharing the files across those endpoints can become a challenging task for an organization, given that they don't have a proper security baseline to begin with. So, answer your question, I would firstly start with that an organization should firstly focus around strengthening their CIA when it comes to their information security protection, or basically protection of their information system. They should strengthen their CIA, as I've mentioned, where they should focus on firstly ensuring the confidentiality of that piece of information. So for ensuring the confidentiality, they should be having a host based, let's say a firewall, or maybe a VPN, a site to site VPN or client to site VPN in place for a secure tunnel to access the files, which would then be circulated across the organization's intranet, even if somebody is connecting over a public Wi-Fi or from their homes network facility. Having a VPN adds an extra layer of security. So having these two very common solution in place can secure the remote working functionality. Coming to another aspect, which is integrity, ensuring integrity of information is very crucial, because For example, an organization is into manual processing activities where they have to, for example, download the files and then process it over their endpoint system. So for the timing those files are on their endpoint system, those files are supposed to be encrypted, and the best way to do it is to enable data at rest encryption. For example, let's say there is an organization X and they are working using the Windows operating system. So over Windows you have two options available. For the home version you have device encryption, and for the pro or the enterprise version you have BitLocker. So either of these facilities can be used to ensure the integrity of the information which is being, I would say, stored over the endpoints owned by the asset custodians. To ensure the availability of the information, that the right person should be having the access of the information at the right moment, I would say user awareness trainings or user awareness in general is very essential. Because even if you have the best of the security controls in place, you have the best of, I would say, the expert in house to map and monitor everything, if the endpoint custodians or the asset owners are not aware of what are their, I would say, rights, and what is the periphery of till which they can use their asset and beyond which they are not supposed to perform anything, it would become a major challenge for the organization to ensure a functional information security management system in place. So I believe these are the three major things when it comes to CIA that an organization can do when they are going fully remotely, or maybe they are deciding to go for a hybrid model. Another thing which I would say I have covered in my previous responses is manual intervention is quite required even if an automated scheduled job is running at the back end. Manual monitoring of those scheduled jobs would ensure that, okay, just in case any, I would say, alert that got missed by any chance, that can be taken care of when frequent manual auditing is being done. So these are some of the ways an organization, as I've mentioned, can secure their remote working model.
Okay. Okay. So before moving on to next question, Nikunj, I have a question for you. I have seen many organizations what they do. They install monitoring tool in their employee computer when they are working from home. So they can they see what are they doing, how much work they have done. So is it correct? Is it does it violate any compliance, or is it like a part of a compliance?
Shakib, to answer your question, monitoring is of different, like there are different types of monitoring, first of all. I would differentiate them in front of you. First one can be monitoring of security events or security incidents. Another monitoring could be of the capacity or the capacity management. That, let's say you have servers and you have a threshold of, let's say, some number, and if it is crossing that number, the server utilization is crossing that number, then obviously that would bring the server down in that case because of overburdening. We are overburdening the server. So this is something that comes under capacity management, right? So talk about another monitoring, that is, if the question that you asked me was around, let's say,
The
people who work.
monitoring, sorry for interrupting. The monitoring tool they use is like which give them access to the laptop, complete access. Like they can see through camera, they can hear from microphone. This
Okay.
is as seen. So what is it allowed, or like what do you say about this?
Yes, Shakib. So, yes, I would be answering this question. So, basically, what happens is if there are certain activities or certain processes that need to be handled by certain people in the organizations, right? So, the processes, if you see ultimately these processes, or there are a set of processes, the ownership of these processes belongs to the organization. Ownership of these assets or things that the people or employees are working with belongs to the organization. Let's talk about just taking an example of you know an organization that deals with the operations of or teleservicing, telecalling services. So what happens generally, generally you might have heard whenever you are calling a customer care of, let's say, any customer care, where obviously when your call gets connected, you would be hearing a line which says that your call might be recorded for training and the other purposes. So basically, this is something that is required for performance evaluation, and performance evaluation is very important to run an organization. When you're not obviously evaluating the performance of employees that are working under the organization, because they are fulfilling the requirements of the organization, they are working for the organization, and whatever data they are working with belongs to the organization or the partners of the organization. Though, so holistically talking about the ownership that belongs to the organization, because there is no personal data. Obviously you cannot just tap a phone or mobile phone of a employee, that is a personal phone number of the employee. You cannot just monitor anything in that sense. But where the boundary ends for the corporate data or corporate assets, till that boundary things can be monitored in terms of what all monitoring things that I monitoring functionalities I just mentioned.
Okay, so if organization is like any organization is monitoring the data of the laptop, I think they should at least uh, tell them, inform that
Yes,
the
because
device is belong to
yes, because
laptop.
I'll give you references of certain. So if you talk about the NIST framework, there is a whole domain of AU, that is accountability policy, right? So audit and accountability policy, what it says generally is that events should be logged, and what kind of events should be logged, how often these should be logged, and how where these logs should be retained and retained securely. Obviously, should not be accessible by anyone. Similarly, if you talk about ISO 27001, it talks about the logging and monitoring domain. Logging and monitoring domain talks about all these things that we just discussed.
Okay, thank you, Nikunj. Okay, so coming back to Sanjana, like what steps company should take, like if they suspect a breach of compliance policy has happened?
Okay, so Shakib, to answer this question, let's consider this question in two parts. Firstly, where there can be a chances that a breach might take place in an organization because they are working around confidential or sensitive information. So we would be considering this question in two parts, where breach has actually happened and the breach is likely to happen. So speaking of where breach is likely to happen, so organizations which usually work around collecting credit card information or processing, I would say, personal information of any user for the business purposes, those organizations are on the verge of data breaches more than the organization who are not actively doing such activities. Now, what they can do on their part, firstly, setting up the right policies which meets the business expectations, because we cannot, I would say, exclude business from security. Security has to go as per the business requirement. So we have to firstly think what the business is all about. My bad. So firstly, the security implementer maybe in the organization has to think about what the business operation is all about. Then as per that, they have to align security guidelines or policies or procedure in their organization. Another thing which has been included even in the latest version of ISO 27001 is the threat intelligence activity, which I would like to highlight over here. They must indulge in threat intelligence services, or they may get a tool or even get a managed service provider onboarded for threat intelligence services, as I've just mentioned, to get to know that what are their vulnerable points. Okay, because uh, if we try to go process by process or by scenario, there are endless vulnerable points if we think of. So to, I would say, cut down all those possibilities and to actually draw a line that okay, these are the threat surfaces or threat actors which are actually meaningful to my organization. For that understanding, an organization must indulge in threat intelligence services. For that, they can use a threat intelligence tool or even get a help of a managed service provider. Post that, they must conduct a risk assessment. They must indulge in the risk management program as a whole. But for again that, they have to set some certain policies how they would be conducting their entire risk management program. They should be assessing all those risks that would be arising from the threats which they have analyzed in the threat intelligence program which they have set up as per the policies again. Once they analyze all those risks, they must be coming up with a risk treatment plan, and as per the risk treatment plan and as per the risk assessment which has been done, they must be setting up a incident response plan eventually, because risk assessment and incident management goes hand in hand. You cannot uh, make out an effective incident response plan without conducting a proper risk management program. So the idea to have a proper and effective incident response plan is to conduct a proper risk assessment, because risk assessment gives you a holistic idea that what can be the possible threats that can happen to your endpoint system, since we are talking about endpoint security compliance today. So now coming to the part where the breach has happened. So when the breach has happened, so rather than I would say initiating an instantaneous incident response plan where the organization has to now haphazardly figure out that okay, now we have to do this, we have to do that, uh, rather than going with that approach, that's why we often advise our clients and customers that they should firstly indulge in the risk management activity and then outline an incident response plan about all the incidents that can plausibly happen to their environment. So if they have a proper incident response plan in place, they have proper detection solutions in place, isolating the infected, I would say, endpoint system gets quite easier for the SOC analysts. So they can just contain those systems separately, they can cut that system from the network till that system is quite recoverable and good to use. So that is something which can be done definitely.
Okay. So whenever you suspect an infection or any infected machine or incident has happened, isolate the infected machine. Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. Nikunj, how can organization balance the need for endpoint security with user productivity? Uh, could you share some insight on this?
So I would take reference from what Sanjana just said. So enterprise risk assessment, it is one of the most critical part of any cybersecurity or information security framework or standard. So a risk assessment, a comprehensive enterprise level risk assessment, helps us to assess all the processes and the assets that are being used in order to complete these processes. So on the basis of which, well, obviously we create the risk statements and we calculate the risk score. So on the basis of what results we have received from the risk assessment, whatever risk register is coming to us, on the basis of that, basically gives us a clarity what kind of controls we should go on for implementation, what all controls we can keep for, let's say, next year objectives that we need to implement, right? If you talk about operational security part, one of the utmost important part in operational security is that the operations systems, or the operational systems, or the systems or endpoints that are being used in the operations on a daily basis should not be hampered in terms of, let's say you're from the information security team and you have implemented certain solutions on the endpoints. So generally, these endpoint solutions come agent based. So they have certain agents associated to them that you need to install on the user devices. Sometimes what happens, these agents are very heavy in terms of memory usage and in terms of all the other activities that they're running in the background. So generally, what happens in such scenarios, systems responses to certain actions or events, it is a bit slowed down. So obviously, operational systems should never face such kind of things. So whenever we are implementing information security in an organization, whenever we are integrating the information security, we so implement integrating information security is a better say than implementation, because whenever we are making a strategy, so first of all, before, like, prior to implementation or integration of information security, we need to make a strategy. So what a CISO does basically is, CISO creates the strategy how the information security can be integrated into the processes of the organization, because the most important thing for the organization is the vision mission of the organization. Whatever their business is, whatever they want to achieve, that is the utmost important thing for the organization. And nothing, even the security controls, should not compromise the efficiency or productivity of the operations. So if, let's say, you are implementing a control that hampers the daily operations of the employees, then it is not advisable to implement that particular tool in the organization. It is always advised to implement something that makes tasks easier for the employees. So information security integrated with the processes without hampering the processes.
Okay, for startup company, I would like to share something. Like for all the startup, we have a blog on Kratikal. You guys can go there after the session. You can check out the type of compliance for startups. This is really full of useful resources we have on the blog. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Okay, this is our last question, by the way. Nikunj, usually SMEs find it difficult to implement this compliance because of budget. So can they go to open source solution, some open source resources?
Yes, Shakib, this is something that is very that would be very useful for a lot of people who are viewing this webinar. So this is a very common question from our clients, our customers, that let's say if we are dealing with a small scale organization who doesn't have a lot of people in terms of numbers who are working, let's say if the strength is around 50 or less than 100. So what happens, obviously, in an enterprise level organization, everything is set, all the processes are set, all the people, the RACI basically responsibility is set for each and every individual working in an enterprise level organization. But if you talk about, let's say, startups or small scale organizations who are still developing and moving forward in their business, obviously to invest in such, because if you talk about tools like MDM, they are very costly in terms of the commercials. If you talk about tools like MDM to implement, they are very costly. So basically, generally, these organizations, they do not prefer to invest in such tools or implementations. Obviously, they need to focus on their business because they're growing it. It should not be like a burden on them that you need to implement this and you'll be secure after that. No. So obviously, whenever we are dealing with clients who have small organizations, small scale organizations, the first thing we suggest to them is using open source. So first of all, I would differentiate between types of tools or softwares that are in the market. One is the licensed software that can be paid or it can be free. The free would be the freemium that we, or the freeware that we call. So if it is a paid software, obviously it's something that we are getting licensed for. Open source is something that is openly, the source code of an open source tool is openly available to the public, right? But it is not like it is pirated. It can be customized. It is highly customizable. Open source tool is highly customizable. Obviously, a licensed tool may not be customizable. That is something that you are getting, you are paying, and you are getting a tool as it is. But if you are deploying an open source tool in your organization or any of the platforms of your organization, you have the flexibility to customize it according to your needs. Because the source code is available to you, and you can make tweaks and changes whatever you need according to your business nature. And the third one is, the last category is the pirated softwares. These are a big no for any kind of organization, be it a small scale organization or be it a large scale organization, using pirated software. So, what are pirated softwares? These are basically illegally obtained softwares. So, a pirated software would be something. It is a copy of a paid software or a licensed tool, which is running with the help of a fake key or a fake credential or a fake license. So these kind of tools should be avoided, or obviously we should not use any pirated tools in organizations. Even if you are using it on your personal systems, that is also a suggestion. Do not use pirated tools because they can come with a lot of malwares, and you will never you will not be able to realize when it compromised your personal data, your PII, your financial information, or anything like that. So generally, you might have noticed, if you, let's say, with your personal systems, obviously we also have installed. So we have coming from a time where we used to play games on, say, computers and laptops, right? So generally at that time we were not investing in games and playing games, or let's say what all softwares we need to use on those computers. What we used to do was download a cracked software for the same. But at the same time, the antivirus software in the system used to flag that particular file, that this is malicious. This is what I'm trying to say. Using pirated softwares is a big no. You can go on for open source. The only on for using an open source software is that you need to maintain it. You should have people with proper competence who should be able to deploy it, configure it according to your needs. Otherwise, it would be just like a simple tool that obviously you are not able to realize how it should work. Otherwise, open source tools have a lot of you can say power in terms of execution in the systems. But obviously, if you're getting a licensed tool, that is something that is managed by the the product provider, and obviously the 24/7 service is available in that case, or whatever is mentioned in your service level agreement with the third party product provider. Obviously, in open source, there are certain challenges in terms of customer support conversations or things like that.
Okay, like you said, using crack software to activate your Windows or tool is really a risk. I have created a proof of concept for this. I would like to share my screen here. In the on your screen, you can see there's an activator. When the person this is activator, when the person run that activator, it will open up the activator, but in background there's a ransomware has started, and you can see that it's not encrypted. This is why it is really important to avoid cracked software or cracked tools. Okay. Okay, this is the last section, the last question. This time, Nikunj and Sanjana, I would like to take input from both of you one by one. So, could you share some recommendation, like the best practices for compliance and resources that our attendees can use to learn more about this endpoint security compliance policy? Sanjana, could you start this?
All right, Shakib. So the best resources one can refer when it comes to endpoint security compliance. So there are a lot of, I would say, white papers available on LinkedIn, where the industry's specialists and experts often share their insights in a form of white paper, be it an article, be it their opinion. So following up with those experts can be one thing. Another thing is, if somebody really wants to learn about how endpoint security compliance actually works, they should visit the sites of the, I would say, market leaders who provide the solution in this domain. So since those people are the solution provider when it comes to endpoint security compliance, they would definitely be publishing some blogs, some articles, or maybe the white papers for reference. So going through those white papers, one can be updated. Okay, these are the features which are now available for, I would say, organizations to use, and therefore they can make a very conscious choice to, pick whether they should be going with an MDM solution, or be it a unified MDM solution, be it EDR, XDR, EDS, whatever fits their business the best. Apart from that, another thing they can do is to be updated about the news and circulars which are often circulated by the government. So certain is one of the major sources of information when it comes to the cybersecurity circulars often circulated by the government. There are many things uploaded by cert in specifically, where one can go and just refer to that. There are many articles and blogs catered to the NIST is a very vast domain in itself. So endpoint security compliance is definitely covered under that framework. So one can definitely go and check articles and blogs around it. One key differentiator I would like to bring over here is that our attendees must focus that whatever piece of information they are relying on, they that must come from a very legitimate source, rather than going forward with anybody just because that title sounds quite interesting or the content sounds quite interesting. Rather than going with that approach, I would request you to focus on the content which is being directly published by the industrial specialist and the service provider specifically.
Okay, Nikunj,
So,
do you have any?
yes, to add on to Sanjana's pointers, what she just said, one thing I would like to repeat, because this is generally the most asked question, or that this is something that we face in, let's say, on a daily basis, talking to the clients. So generally, cloud native organizations, they say that we are hosted on cloud, our resources are completely placed on cloud. We don't need to implement endpoint level security in the organization. So there is the endpoint that is connecting to the cloud also, right? The connection between cloud and your applications that are hosted on cloud and the servers that are placed on the cloud, they are safe. Obviously, even if they are managed by the, uh, let's say, the cloud providers like AWS, GCP, one of the biggest threats or vulnerabilities that can arise in that particular case is configuration. If you have misconfigurations, even if they are being provided by AWS, because AWS will provide you an infrastructure. That is up to you. How do you configure it for your usage? If let's say you have opened unnecessary ports, you have opened unnecessary links, then in that case, misconfiguration is the biggest thing that can affect your environment infrastructure. And because endpoints are communicating with the cloud and applications on the cloud, there is traffic between endpoint and the cloud. That is why the wireless security of the organization and the endpoint security should be managed so that nothing malicious is entering from the endpoint to the cloud or our critical resources.
Okay. So, guys, to summarize, I would like to share here, I would like to tell you that most breach have happened because of misconfiguration. I've seen routers, uh, internet connected device are connected to internet but are misconfigured. They can be easily accessed. The hacker can easily access them. They're using default password, default settings. So these are something you should take uh, care of. And so now it's time to wrap up this session. I would like to thank you, Sanjana and Nikunj, for your valuable inputs. I would like to thank all the audience who has joined us during this session. I hope you have enjoyed the session. I hope you have learned something new. And till then, stay safe and stay secure, guys. Have a good night.